Right, good evening everyone. This is Mel from Sneakers Corner. And as you can see, we have Odin Lafontaine from France here to talk to us. Odin is the author of a fantastic book called The Great Secret of Islam.
I'm a 40-ish-year-old man. I used to be a strategy consultant for businesses. And I've studied Islam since 15 years. And with the help of my mentor, I could call him so, Edouard Marie Galez, who is a specialist, doctor in theology, and a specialist of Islam's origins. And he published a thesis in 2004 or 5 called Le Messie et son prophète, the Messiah and his prophet. You can look for it on his website, Roots of Islam True History. And it was a groundbreaking thesis. It was a huge thesis with so many information that the groundbreaking stuff was a bit hidden in it. And this groundbreaking stuff, I think, is a new exegesis, a new understanding of the Quran, based on the tradition of Eastern Christians who speak Arabic, but who do not abide by the Islamic understanding of the Quran. And then they can have a critique of the Islamic understanding of the Quran and look deeply into it. He worked with Antoine Moussali, and there were many Eastern Christian scholars. We can name Christoph Luxenberg, for example, who is very well known nowadays.
So just to clarify, he worked with Gallet, was that right?
No, Luxemburg did not. I don't think he worked with Gallet. No, with Galez, but Galez took his work into account.
Okay. Yeah.
Galez's mentor was Antoine Moussali, Lebanese priest, who was a teacher of Arabic at the Algiers University, and he was not a Hufas because he was not he was a Christian, but he knew most of the Christian by heart, most of the Quran by heart. And with him, they pointed at some contradictions and discrepancies in the Quranic text that led him to understand that the Islamic reading of the text is wrong, that there is something artificial in it, and they were able to uncover the raw sense, the original sense of some of the passages, maybe most of the Quranic text. I read Galez's thesis. Then I met him, we became friends, and I made with him a sort of vulgarization of his work, which was the Great Secret of Islam. I published it in French and in France in 2014.
And its French title its French title was, you were about to say earlier on, and I'll cut across you. In French,
the title is Le Grand Secret de l'Islam.
Okay.
And it has also been translated into Arabic and Persian. Wow. You can find the translation on my website. I have 2 websites, a French one and an international one. French one is legrandsecretdelislam.com. Yeah. And the English one is thegreatsecretofislam.com.
Yeah, great.
And so this was published in 2014, but I've kept on working on the topic of Islam's origin. I've come close to some Inara scholar. You
explain
your former video that was a member of Inara. I'm not a member of Inara, but I attended to some of the conferences of Inara. And I've befriended its director, Robert Kerr.
Robert Kerr, yeah. So just for those who maybe are not familiar, Inara is a group of academic scholars who are studying the origins of Islam. And
exactly. It has been initiated by Karl-Heinz Ohlig,
Holy cow.
Manfred Kropp, Markus Gross in Germany.
Yeah,
It is linked with the Saar University.
yeah,
There is a group of academics who really make Inara, and also some guests. So
yeah. So
as Guillaume D.
they tend to be writing in German, is that right? Or do they have some of their works in English? Maybe French even.
It is an international project,
Yeah.
and they work in English, in German, and in French.
Is Angelica Newitt in that group by any chance?
Is
Angelica Newitt, Dr. Angelica or Professor Angelica Newitt, or she?
Not really. Angelica Newitt is not very. Her line, her thinking, her theories are not really close to those of Inara's.
Yeah, yeah.
But you see, in Inara, what is nice, they're not. There is not a unique way of seeing things.
Yeah.
Karl-Heinz Ohlich has his own theories about Islam. He thinks it comes from Central Asia, something like this.
Yeah.
There are many scholars who participate in Inara, such as Christoph Luxemburg, for example, and others. Volker Popp, which is an authority on numismatics and coins.
It's all the big names, really.
Yes, some European and also American big names.
Yeah.
And it is a very and also Gales took part. He published some article in Inara's publishings. The last one will be the last one. Yes, it will be published, I think, next January. And it is an article about the Muhammad occurrences, the 4 Muhammad occurrences in the Quranic text, and the Ahmad also mentioned. Wow. And Gales claims that all of those mentions are interpolations. They were added to the original text.
Wow, that's a big thing to say there, really. Yeah.
Yes, that's really that's really a grand statement.
Yeah.
Because if you have proved it, if you prove it, what does it mean then? What does it mean about the Quranic text?
You have no.
Was it Muhammad?
Yeah.
Why did some people need to add Muhammad in the text?
Yeah. Well, without Muhammad in the text, you have no link between the Quran and Muhammad, and that's a game changer. Like
yes, of course.
Already we have, you know, a lot of people, you know, we have a lot of videos on our channel which suggest that Muhammad is actually just a reference to Jesus to begin with. But if it's a later interpolation, then that means that you can just throw those verses out as not being part of the original.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think I don't completely agree with Gales, because I think one of those interpolation is not one of those mention is not an interpolation, but it was in the original text. I think so, and I think it points to Jesus.
Yeah.
As being the Muhammad.
Yeah.
In the text.
Yeah.
But there are many interpretations that can be possible.
Yeah, I just want to say in passing that, you know, you laughed when I mentioned Angelica Newitt, but one of the reasons why we wouldn't expect her to be in that group is she tends to go towards the traditional line rather than the more skeptical line. Would that be fair to say?
Oh, yes. No, it's not because of her hairdo. It's much more serious than this. It's because she's she's too close to the tradition, and also there is something odd with her. You see, she was the student of Anton Spitaler, German scholar who worked with the Third Reich, who was the Islamic scholar for the Third Reich, and he had a very vicious view about Islam. I think so. I think this is only my opinion.
Yeah.
He wanted to use Islam as a tool for world domination. this was the way Hitler's and the Third Reich view Muslims and Islam. And he lied about the destruction of some very old manuscripts and microfilms of manuscript. He told that they were destroyed during the bombing of Cologne.
Yeah.
But in fact, they were not destroyed at all. They were in his possession, and he gave them to his student, Angelika Neuwirth, who kept them for herself during a period of time, which I cannot explain. I don't know why she did it. Yeah. And it's only at the end of the last century, or maybe during the early years of 2000, that she published them and said, you know what, all the manuscripts you thought that were destroyed 60 years ago, here they are. And this this was the beginning of the Corpus Coranicum project.
Yeah, that's strange. I never heard any of this before. Wow.
You didn't know? You didn't know about Anton Spitaler and the lost microfilms?
No, that's the first time I heard it. So I'm sure there's lots of things I haven't heard about yet. But yeah, no, this is all new to me. Wow, that's amazing.
This is the thing that I find very odd with Neuwirth, because this is not very scientific. Why did she keep the secret for so long?
Yeah, no, it seems so contrary to the way most scholars view things. It's all about getting everything out into the light and let people know the knowledge and so on.
This is also one of the difficulties with studying Islam. Islam is at the center of much attention.
Yeah.
And there are some ideologies, some powers that want to use Islam. And so the research on Islam's origin is can be a bit difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you suggesting that she might have had ideological reasons to conceal it for so long? Or was it just an oversight on her part, or maybe some other reason?
I don't know. Yeah. Anton Spitaler, why did he keep it secret for decades? I don't know. know. And why did I think he made Angelika Neuwirth promise to keep the manuscript hidden until his death.
Oh, okay.
But even until after his death, she kept them secret.
Yeah.
Some years, which I don't know why. I don't know why. I can only assume maybe she had some ideological reasons.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What I noticed with her, and we'll kind of go on to the main topic in a second, but what I've noticed from her lectures, even though they're incredibly knowledgeable, she very much seems to believe that Muhammad is the origin of the Quran, and doesn't seem to question that, and then kind of creates a context which suggests that Mecca and Medina and all of that story makes perfect sense. So it's a strange one for someone so knowledgeable to take that all hook, line, and sinker.
It's not that that extraordinary, because when you look really into it, most of the scholars up until the 70s, they took Islam's traditional narrative for granted.
Yeah.
And they studied Islam through an Islamic lens.
Yeah.
And you cannot find anything valuable with this method.
No.
This is a bit what Henri Lamens or Patrick Frechron explain. You have to start from scratch and to look at the evidence in a chronological order. You look first at what happened in the 5th century, 7th century, 8th century, and you look at the sources from the 7th century and then from the 8th and so on. And you cannot explain something that happened in the 7th century with sources from the 10th century.
It sounds like that some people are building the narrative on sand, whereas you really need to build things on a rock solid foundation. What would you say are the
exactly
sort of areas to build, if we were going to build a narrative, what are the solid foundations for all of this? Because I think this is really central.
Yes, this is really central because it is also one of the key issues of Islamology, is that we have very few very reliable evidence sources. And most of what we thought true is based on, is built on sand, like you said. And there is not so much in terms of solid ground. There are some artifacts from the 7th century, such as coins or what we find with archaeology. We have some sources from the 7th century. We have the critique of Islamic tradition, but most of Islamic tradition cannot be, it's not reliable. And we have to look at it with a very critical prism. And also we have the Quranic text. And as a sort of student of Galles, it is one of my my main features, because the Quranic text has not really been studied as a source, as an historical source. Some scholars have started to look into it like this. Patricia Krohn, for example, when she explained that the Quranic pagans could not have lived in Mecca because the text describes them as peasants, fishermen, and so on, and this cannot have taken place in Mecca.
Yeah.
But you see, the text in itself, it tells a story which is not taken into account. It's as if the text was an alien.
Yeah.
But the
Not
text
from the
is very
sky.
understandable. This is what Galles worked on, and I'm pursuing his work with his help. And when you look into the text, you see that it is not really an Islamic text.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's a very strange statement, a very strange claim, because of course it is a sacred text of the Muslims. But literally, it is not Islamic. It dates from before Islam, and it has been Islamicized by the tradition. And when you look at it without the tradition concepts, the tradition categories, the tradition reading, you have a very strange text, which speaks about Jews, mushrikuns. We don't know. We don't really know what mushrikuns are. Which speaks about believers. Which speaks about places. Which speaks about events. And when we have a sort of global reading of the text, global exegesis, there we can make sense of it. When we look, for example, at the expression "people of the book," al-kitab, and you look at all of the dimensions of the people of the book, you see that it defines a certain category which cannot be what Islam tells us that it is. It is not, when you look at all of the mentions, all of them, it cannot be Jews or Christians or Muslims. You are forced to consider that it means, and it can only mean, Jews in the sense people of the Torah, people of the, not of the Bible, but the Torah.
Yeah.
And when this is established, you can go on with the reading and see that among the people of the book in the text, the Quran divides them between two categories, the good ones and the bad ones.
Yeah.
The good ones are the vast majority, and the bad one, the bad ones are the vast majority of them, and the bad one is a very small group, which is said to be friends to the believers, to the one who listen to the preachings that are noted in the Quranic text, and we can then define who are the good one, and who are the bad ones. We see that the bad ones are the one who committed an horrible sin. They covered, which is the Arabic root KFR, they are Kufars, Kufa.
Yeah.
They covered the Torah. And so they change its meaning by covering the text with something else.
Like a new meaning.
It's a new meaning. And this is exactly what the rabbinical Jews have done with the Talmuds. The Talmuds are a new layer which is placed upon the Torah, which is placed upon the sacred text. And the Jews nowadays, the Jews in the 7th century, they read the Torah through the Talmudic interpretation. And this is what is the great accusation to those bad Jewish people in the Quranic text. And on the contrary, it defines the good Jews as being the one who don't cover the text, so they are not the Kufars.
Yeah.
They don't cover it. They read it for what it tells us, what it tells. Especially, it points to the messianity, the messiahship of Jesus.
Yeah.
And if you keep on reading all the mentions about the people of the book or the different mention of a book in the Quran, you see that this group is described, this Jewish group, this good Jewish group is described as having the right face.
Yeah.
Because he believes in Jesus, but it is not Christian. It does not believe that, does not believe in Trinity, in the Holy Trinity, in the incarnation, and hence it differs from the Christians. And there you can see who are the mushrikun in the text. The tradition tells us they are Christians because they are polytheists. But the root does not mean polytheist. It means associationists, the people who associate. And
in the sense of associating three persons with the Godhead, is that or to have?
Of course it is. You see, it's a very old claim that the Jews had towards Christians. This is not a Quranic invention. The rabbis in the antiquity, they accused the Christian of being associationists.
Yeah.
So this is not a novelty.
So just to summarize, just before we move on, so you have one group are the Kufar, who are the rabbinical Jews who cover up the meaning of the Torah, and then so they're the bad group. And did you say they were majority or minority? Majority, I think you said.
Vast majority.
Vast majority. And then you have a minority group who believe in the Torah, but believe that there is a Messiah who's Jesus, but not in the Christian sense. He's not God. He's more like a prophet, and that's exactly the good Jew group that it's referring to.
And when you look really into the text, you come to realize that this group are called the Nasara in the text.
Yeah.
Nazarene. And Nazarene does not mean Christian. Christian in Arab is Masih. You see, etymologically, Christ is Messiah, Christian is Messianic, and this is the exact meaning of Masih. Masih, al-Masih in Arabic is the Messiah. Yeah. And it is very strange that you don't find any reference to real etymological Christian in the Quranic text. There is one mention to the people of the gospel, one and only one.
Yeah.
But otherwise, nothing at all about Masih people.
Yeah.
Which could tell us that the believers believe themselves, the audience of the preachers, they believe to be the true Masih.
Yeah.
In opposition to the mushrikuns, who were the wrong Christians, the wrong because they associate God, they associate Jesus with God.
Yeah.
And so this comes from the Quranic text itself. And it tells us a very different story than the Islamic tradition. And with this in mind, you can take a deeper dive into the text. and these the stories it tells us. It tells us about a bait. Bait in Arabic, it's the same word as in Aramaic, which means house. House in Aramaic, it refers to the temple of Jerusalem. When you look at all dimensions of bait, the Islamic tradition tells us it's a Kaaba in Mecca. But we have a few, a big number of reasons to think that the Kaaba wasn't there in the 7th century at first. And secondly, the mentions of the bait, they fit exactly to Jerusalem, as being the place of Abraham, the station of Abraham, the place of Abraham's sacrifice, the place of the Hajj. Hajj is an Aramaic and Hebrew word which designates a kind of pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And so we see a very different story. We see also stories about wars and combat that leads to the Beit, to Jerusalem. So Muslim people, the Muslim thinks it pertains to the people from Medina coming back to Mecca, and all the stories with Muhammad we know of. But there was several attempts in the 7th century from Jews and Arabs to take Jerusalem. And could it be that the Quranic text describes them instead of describing the hypothetical Mecca? For example, in 614, Jerusalem was taken by an alliance of Persian Jews from Babylon, Persia, and Arabs, Christian Arabs. And I think that some of the verses describe this event. It's Surah 48, for example. In Surah 48, we see the believers coming to the temple, coming to the Beit, with the animals ready for the sacrifice, for example. And then they are being expelled from the city, Jerusalem. And it could describe a real event. It could be that the Judeo-Nazarenes and their Arab partners took Jerusalem with the alliance, with the Jewish-Persian alliance. They were part of this alliance, and they wanted to do something with the temple, and it has something to do with the Messiah, with the coming of the Messiah. And they were hindered from doing so by the locals and by the other Jews.
The rabbinical Jews, presumably.
The rabbinical Jews, the Jews from Babylon, which just finished the Talmud. And this could explain the hatred towards rabbinical Jews in the text, which has become the general hatred towards Jews in Islam.
I just want to point out that, in my experience, the people that you have the most hatred for are the group that you are closest to. And so the idea that they would have this hatred for them makes more sense if they are related to them in a very close way. So the idea that they are a Jewish sect, in a sense, in opposition to the establishment, the rabbinical Jews, who are like, they are the establishment and they are the anti-establishment group of Jews, essentially. That's my first observation. The second thing is, I remember very clearly my first impression when I read through the Quran, and about 50% of it was referring to the kuffar. So that's a huge chunk. I think it's only about 10% is referring to Allah in comparison. So there's clearly a dialogue going on, essentially, and it's got to do with these two Jewish groups, one the rabbinical group and this other group that you're referring to. So it's, though there's more to it than that. It's not as superficial as that first impression I had, as you'll explain further. But I suppose a question just to lead on from there would be, was the Quran originally, and I know the answer in advance, but I think it's an important question to ask, but was it essentially one book in the beginning, or fragments? Who were the authors or author, and who was it addressed to? Those are kind of three questions there that perhaps you could bring enlightenment to us on.
There are many different ways to answer those three questions. There are the paleography and old manuscript studies that tells us that there was no unique book at the beginning, but there were some collections that were there were additions to those collections. When you look at the Sanaa Palimpsest, for example, you get only something like 20 or 15% of the text, and it is arranged in a different order than the final text.
Yeah.
And you see it also in other old manuscript collections, such as the I've got a memory hole, but everything is in the book.
Yeah. Right.
But you see it in the other collection. You see that the percentage of the text grows in time.
Yeah.
It tells us that there has been a process of compilation, addition, and addition to the text. This is one way of answering the question. The other is the study of the text itself. What does it tell us? What does it tell us? And we see a patchwork. We see many pieces, very different one from another. We find some sources to those pieces. Guillaume Dye, for example, D-Y-E, who is a top-notch Quran scholar, really one of the leading scholars in the world nowadays, has founded many sources to some verses. Sources which are Jewish tradition texts, midrashes, Aramaic Christian texts, and so on.
Yeah.
And it is a very compelling evidence that the text was a sort of collection, an editing. But there is something more in the study of the text. It is the meaning of it. When you look at it, you see a preacher or some preachers that preach to believers, and you just have to look at what they tell us, and you see that it's also a patchwork from different preachers or different preachings that have been compiled together, and there are some contradictions. But it also explains why the text is so elusive to the Bible. The preacher preaches to people who knows the Bible. For example, he preaches about Bible stories. He tries to make some sort of lessons from those texts from the Bible to the audience, pertaining to the context. For example, they just had a defeat, military defeat. So the preacher alludes to a biblical passage, and it's supposed to cheer the audience up. For example, the story of Joseph is told in a bit like this. It is told to give a sort of a lesson to the audience according to what the preacher and the audience are living in the 7th century context. So it is not a new version of the story of the Bibles. It is a sort of adaptation done by the preacher, which explains why he is so, it is not the Bible, why he is not so knowledgeable of the Bible, why so many things are odd and not true to the Bible. It's because the preacher is an Arabic preacher. He has been taught the Bible, of course, but he does not know it as a Christian or a Jewish scholar would. And
knowledge, essentially.
And so when you look into the text like this, you see a different meaning. for example, the satanic verses, which is a very a point of strong controversy, and the controversy only comes when you have into mind that the text is supposed to be divine. If the text is divine, then those verses could only be satanic. But if the text is not divine, if it is only a preacher who preaches, what do we see in those satanic verses? We only see a preacher making fun of some superstition of the audience.
Yeah, yeah.
It has nothing satanic about it.
Yeah.
It's
Wow,
only fun, it's only mockery.
Yeah.
And when you, in order to, and I think this is the real meaning of the text,
Yeah,
the literal meaning of the text. And it tells us a lot about what happened in this community of Nazarene Jewish and Christian, former Christian Arabs. And this is one of the main solid ground on which you can build historical hypotheses.
Can I just
otherwise you build on tradition, and tradition, we know now that it is not historically reliable.
Yeah, can I just ask, okay, so there are passages which are from preachers, on the ground preachers to their audience, but there's also seems to be passages, according to your book, which are from, if you like, superior preachers to superior, or what's the word, inferior preachers. So it's instruction to
Exactly,
future,
yes.
Let me see, apprentice preachers, let's say. Master preachers to apprentice preachers.
To a student preacher.
Yeah.
Or preachers who...
yeah, that's probably a better way of putting it.
Exactly, because when we look at the text for what it really is, sometimes it is sort of notes from a preaching scene. Something has been preached and someone has taken notes. But mostly we see notes, we see a preparation, instructions for preaching. When you preach, say this. Don't say this. Say this in this kind of situation. When you will encounter Jews, tell them this. And those are instructions from a master, a teacher. And it might be then, once we have come to understand that there was a Jewish Nazarene community which was very close to the Arabs, it might be that there were those teachers, or some of them were teaching some Arabic preachers their faith. And it is what we see, in fact, in the Quran. We see a preacher teaching a Jewish Nazarene faith creed to some Christians, to some Arab Christians. He tells them about Abraham, he tells them about Moses, he tells them about Jerusalem, he teaches them the ways of the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, he teaches them how to make the coming forth and back between the two hills, Safa and Marwa. And by the way, Safa is a Jewish name for the Mount Scopus in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It is the way that Flavius Josephus, I don't know the English name.
Josephus.
Flavius Josephus, he describes this Mount Scopus in Jerusalem as being Safa. And Marwa, of course, it is the Mount Moriah, which is a temple mount.
Fantastic, yeah, that's important.
And we see lots of teachings like this in the Quran. For example, the Christian Arabs are taught to abide by the kashrut, the Jewish laws for cooking and eating, in order to have them join the new community formed by the Jewish Nazarenes and the believers, the Arab believers, as the former being the sons of Abraham and the latter being the sons of Ishmael. By the way, the Arabs being the sons of Ishmael, it is not a Quranic invention, it is a Jewish invention. The first mention of it is in the Book of Jubilees in the 1st or 2nd century, and it has been a common topic, a topoi, of Jewish apologetic towards Arabs to convert them to Jewish faith, because in the antiquity you could still convert to Judaism, and it has also been a Christian topic, Christian apologetic topics towards Arabs to convert them to Christianity.
Yeah.
And so it is not something new.
So it's a method to make them become proselytes, essentially, converts to this belief system. And of course, they can use that if they can convert a large number of Arabs to their cause, then they can conquer Jerusalem. So there is a pragmatic function to doing this. If you can get them, you can bring about the apocalypse.
In details in the text. When the people are making the Hijra, they become Muhajirun. It might pertain to some displacement. They were expelled from the houses and so on, but it also pertains to a sort of conversion. They become a sort of monk soldiers, religious soldiers. They have to abide by a very strict religious rule, such as the kashrut, for example, and other stuff. But it's mixed in the Quranic text. It is mixed with some Bedouinic or Arabic influence. And Guillaume D, the one I told you about, yeah, he demonstrated that in some of the ascetic, he calls them ascetic rules that are taught in the Quran, we found in the middle interpolation that cannot be from the same source. We have passages in the Quran where the believers, the Muhajirun, are told to be charitable, chaste, for example, but they can also have 4 wives and sex slave and so on. And we see that the 4 wives and the sex slave is an addition. There are two passages in the Quran. I think it's Surah 23 and 70 something, which feature the exact same addition. There is a chastity rule, yeah, and just after kind of
interpolation.
The interpolation which softens the rule.
Yeah.
And then you see that the text, and which will also answer some of your questions. The text has not been conceived as a whole text. It does not date from one particular period of time, or 1 or 2 or 3 particular authors. The text comes from a long process of editing, compiling, addition, corrections, and we have different layers in the text. And so we cannot,
with lots of different authors then, presumably.
Lots of different authors, yeah, which makes it a very complex text. You see, I have done some explanations here, talking about the good Jews and the bad Jews. But when you look at the text as a whole, like I did, you see this. You see that there are, for example, 95% of the mention, for example, for the good Jews by Jews, which fits with my definition, and 5% that don't fit at all, yeah, and that they cannot be from the same author. There's something odd with them. For example, when you look at the way that Surah 9 speaks about the Mushrikun and the Kuffar, it is not the same way at the beginning of the Surah 9. It is not the same way as those are described in other surahs. Yeah, very strange. Yeah. There is something new. It's like another author has written this text.
Yeah. So presumably, with so many different authors, the way this would come together is that at least for a period of time, they all had a common mission, which was the bringing about of the apocalypse with the Messiah returning to Jerusalem. And then gradually over time, the mission changed. And because of that, the meanings of words changed and interpolations had to be added to fit with a new narrative, which wasn't the narrative.
I think so. You see, based on this very solid ground, very solid evidence of the existence of this Jewish community allied with the Arabs, with some Arabs, and that they had this project that is objective to take Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, and have Jesus come back and trigger the apocalypse. We can build something on this, and we know, for example, that we know that Arabs took Jerusalem in 648, something like this, 647. We don't know exactly. We know also that they rebuilt the temple. We have several different and independent sources from the 7th century that tells us that the temple was rebuilt, which is a huge, tremendous event. And we also know that Jesus did not come back. Yeah. I think we would have heard of it if he had. And he did not come back. And on this, we can conjecture that the Arabs divided themselves, and that they tried to make it without Jesus.
Yeah.
This is why this is what I explained in my book. This is one of my theories. So this is not based on evidence as solid as the existence of the Jewish Nazarene group. Those are no theories based on this, but only theories, only hypotheses. I think that there were several Arab factions, many Arab factions. They were sort of united under Muhammad's rules, but not really, in fact, because we see that some of them, some factions, they went to Persia, some of them went to Syria, some of them went to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was not taken at the beginning of the Arab conquest movement, but only maybe 10 days after, 10 years after. It took some time.
Yeah.
So it was not, it tells us that the Muhammad party, the Muhammad faction was not that
prevalent.
Prevalent at the time.
Yeah.
But it achieved it anyways.
Do you know what's interesting, actually? I was just going to say that it's interesting. You have a thesis where, you have preachers training up other preachers, and even in the Islamic tradition, there is the remnant of the idea that there were other prophets at the same time as Muhammad. Do you want to comment on that sort of angle?
Exactly, but first, let me tell you that the Quran tells us this. The Quran tells us how to respond. It tells the preacher how to respond to some accusation that he is only taught by some others.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact reference, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It is only tales from ancient people and so on.
Yeah.
But you made an allusion to the false prophet, the anti-prophet. This is another thing that has come as very solid evidence from Islamology. I'm referring here to a bit of Robert Hoyland's work in God's Path. It makes an allusion to the false prophets, but mainly it's thanks to Hela Wardi, a Tunisian scholar who studied the Islamic tradition and published in French many books about the death of Muhammad and the events that took place thereafter, the war of apostasis, the first fitnas, and so on.
Yeah.
And she's still working on this, and she has many many books to be published, and also on Habib Tawa's work. Habib Tawa is another scholar, a friend, who presented this in one of Inara group conference in Germany. He studied the mentions to the false prophets in the Islamic tradition, and we see that there is something like there are something like 4 or 5 of them, and they are described as being very powerful. Very powerful. 2 of them claim to be equals of Muhammad.
Yeah.
One of them proposed to Muhammad a sort of division of the world. Muhammad would have a half and he another half,
Yeah.
which means considered himself as important as Muhammad, or even more. And when you look really into it, it seems completely impossible that the Islamic traditionists invented such a fact, such things.
Yeah.
100 years after, or 200 or 300 years after.
It doesn't serve the Islamic tradition's cause to have that story included.
Yes, and it is not about the embarrassment criterion that
No.
that was discussed, for example, between Jay Smith and David Wood about the Muhammad's conduct.
Yeah.
It's much more important.
Yeah.
And from this, we can establish that there were several Arab factions, several Arab parties. Some of them had a strong Jewish Nazarene influence. I think Muhammad's faction had this influence, and some had not. Some were only Christian, millenarist Christian who believed in the apocalypse, and some were just here for the taking, for the loot, for the looting, for the slaves, for the power. But there was some a very strong apolitical context this time. In the 7th century, everyone was thinking that the end of time was near and that the Messiah would come. The Jewish people thought that the Messiah, for them, it cannot be Jesus, but the time of the Messiah was near, and this is why they tried to build the temple in 614, for example, because they wanted to trigger the coming of their Messiah. But the Christians also were thinking that the apocalypse was there and that Jesus would come back. And this has been established by looking at old Aramaic text from the 7th century. There has been a very important book that has been published last year in France, Le Coran des historiens, the scholars' Quran, which is a collection of studies, articles from different fields. And one of the scholars is Muriel Debier, who is a specialist on Syriac Christianity from this time. Yeah. And she established that many of the small surahs in the Quran, the apologetical surahs, are in fact Christian texts, or they are Christian adaptation from those Aramaic Christian apologetical texts.
Yeah.
And when you take all of this into mind, several Arab factions, an apologetical context, and the project to take Jerusalem, you kind of fit the pieces together, and you have a much more clearer view of the events that took place in the 7th century that later on will give birth to Islam. And you see also that Islam as a religion was not there at this time. Islam as a religion is a creation maybe from the Umayyads, I think mostly from the Abbasids. But you see also that the ideas, the backbone of Islam was there at this time. And the backbone was the idea that Jesus would come and establish God's kingdom, the reign of God.
Yeah.
And there was a deception. Jesus did not come, but the idea that the people, the believers, can establish the reign of God by themselves is ascertained, and it is the very backbone of Islam still nowadays. Islam today is not the belief in the Quran of the Prophet. It is the belief that the believers, the Muslims, are establishing the reign of God on earth by Islamicizing the world by having the Sharia law enforced. And there is still this idea that at the end of times, Jesus will come back, and the world will become the reign of God.
It's interesting.
This very strong idea. This is what drives everything in the 7th century.
Yeah, it's interesting that almost every ideology that comes along is an attempt to make heaven on earth. It's, you know, and I think here is a great example. You mentioned to me before we started recording that there was an expectation 600 years from the time of Jesus' death that this was a key date. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
It's something to do with Daniel's prophecy.
Yeah.
Also, I found it by working with Galès, Isidore Marie Galès. He took from another scholar, Bruno Bonnet-Aymar, who initiated a translation of the Quran a bit like Luxembourg did, that Muhammad, the word Muhammad, is in fact the Arabic translation of the name, the nickname that the angel Gabriel gave to the prophet Daniel. In the Aramaic or Hebrew text, Gabriel calls Daniel Ish Hamudot. Ish is the man, Hamudot is who is to be loved, who is to be desired, who is to be adored.
Yeah.
And Muhammad is a translation. Mu is the one who is, it's a bit like Ish, the man, the one who is, and Hamad doesn't mean praised in the first sense. In a figurative sense, it can be praised or something like this, like the Muslim tells us. But the original meaning, the original Arabic meaning of Hamad is not praised, it is loved, desired, adored.
Yeah.
And so we see that Muhammad, which is a very strange name, a very strange nickname, which had never been given before Muhammad's time, could be the very name of Daniel. And this makes sense with some other sources. We see, I think it's the Doctrina Jacobi, Didascalie de Jacob, Doctrina Jacobi.
The prophet who came with the sword.
The prophet that comes with the sword is called to be, is he the precursor of the Messiah? Is he the one who announced the coming of the Messiah? This is what the two people, the two Jews, discussed between them. So they are asking themselves, is his claim that the Messiah will come very soon a true claim?
Yeah.
They are not arguing about Muhammad's prophecy. He's not called a prophet in an Islamic sense, but in a Jewish sense. Is he the one? Is he the precursor?
Yeah.
And Daniel is kind of a precursor of the coming of Jesus, because his prophecy tells us exactly when Jesus will come, the first time and at the end of time. And we also see a sort of confirmation of this in the Hadith. There are some Hadiths who tells us that Muhammad was announcing the imminence of the coming of the Messiah. He was not announcing a Messiah that would come at the end of the times in 2000 years, but he told the believers that the coming of Jesus was imminent.
Yes.
Imminent.
It's surprising that survived in the Hadith, considering it was easily contradicted.
It's very difficult to obliterate an oral tradition.
Yeah.
you cannot, in order to destroy it, you have to kill everyone who has this tradition in mind, in heart.
Yeah.
The only thing you can do, because you cannot kill all those people, is maybe add some extra stuff in the tradition. For example, you can add that when Jesus will come back, he will kill all the pigs.
Yeah.
Example. Or you can hide the tradition in a forest of other tradition.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of ridiculous and ludicrous other traditions.
Yeah.
That will
be lost in the foliage.
Be lost in them. But
yeah.
Nowadays with computers, nothing is lost.
So
nothing is lost. And
so the prophecy was meant. Sorry. So the prophecy suggests that it should occur 600 years after the death of Jesus. Is that right?
Kind of. You see, Daniel's prophecy about the first coming of the Messiah, it is a sort of calendar. It gives us a chronology between the destruction of the temple and the coming of the Messiah.
Yeah.
The destruction in the temple by the Babylonians in the antiquity. It was something like in the 6th century, I think.
BC.
Christ.
Yeah.
And so Daniel kind of tells us that the temple will be destroyed. The temple is destroyed.
Yeah.
You have to wait something like 600 years, not exactly 600, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And then the Messiah will come.
Yeah.
And then the temple has been rebuilt by Herodias. You know the story.
Yeah.
And it was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70.
Yeah.
So you add the 500 or 600 years to the 70, and you come at the end of the 5th century, 6th century, maybe the beginning of the 7th century. And it is another ingredient in the apocalyptic context.
Yeah, yeah.
Some people were believing that the prophecy of Daniel was to be was to be repeated, and that the Messiah would come.
And just to refer back to an earlier video where we showed that in the year 610, the 2nd of March 610, Mars crossed the pathway of the moon, passed behind the moon during a crescent moon. That would symbolize war coming from Sasan, because the crescent moon was the symbol of Sasan. So that could have added to the overall apocalyptic mood of the time, because four years later, you have that confederation of Arabs, Christians, and Jews who go across to conquer Jerusalem. So it kind of fits to a piece.
To explain why all the Jews of the Levant, of Palestine, Syria, rebelled against the Byzantine Empire at this time. And all of them, I think mostly all of them rebelled, which has never happened in history before.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so I wonder, is there anything that I've left out? So we have the various groups. So we believe that the Quran was written essentially by preachers to preachers or to their main audience. Now, what's interesting and something we haven't brought up yet is that in the Quran itself, it refers to the Quran as if it was another book. So this is important. The meaning of this word Quran actually in the Syriac context of the word, exactly. As in a lectionary. So the preachers had a preaching to do, but they also had a text that they would primarily use in a liturgical sense, which would be the lectionary. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit on that side of things?
This is so simple, in fact. So simple. But we are polluted. Our mind is polluted. It's a very strong word, but polluted with Islamic categories. And when we see the word Quran, for most people, for maybe all of the people, it can only mean the Islamic Quran. Whereas the Quran is a common word. It was very widely used in the 7th century to name religious books, lectionaries, which were some kind of digests from the Bible, from biblical texts, psalms, hymns, and prayers. And still today, Christians and other religious groups have lectionaries. And in Aramaic, the name is Korono Kehyana Quran. This is Quran in Arabic.
Yeah.
And when you read the Quranic text and you read mentions about the Quran, it refers to a lectionary, which is not the Quran itself, which is another book, a religious book, which I think had been written by the Jewish Nazarene to convert the Arab to their faith.
And presumably this lectionary would have been in Arabic to make it easier for them to...
This is what the text tells us.
Yeah.
It is an Arabic text, a very clear Arabic text.
Yeah.
There are many verses that specifically point the Jewish Nazarene Quran to be like this.
Yeah.
And this is why it has to be believed by the Arabs.
And it's also...
When you have this in mind, the sense is very clear, it's very simple.
Yeah.
You just have to read the Quran for what it is. And once you've read it, you cannot go back. It's
Yeah.
what you told me about about my book.
Yes.
About, the explanation I give for the Quran.
Yeah.
But
Oh, yeah.
it's a bit like Edgar Allan Poe, his novel The Stolen Letter. Is it the name in English? Stolen Letter. Stolen Letter, maybe. That's a novel. It's about a crime, and the main piece of the crime, the main evidence, is a letter that the investigators are looking for.
I'm not.
They only find it at the end of the novel. It was there, hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
On the top of the in the living room, on the chimney or something like this.
Yeah.
And this is what my book is about, and this is what Islam is all about. Islam's truth is hiding in plain sight in the Quran. You just have to read the Quran for what it is really, and to forget about all the false conception, the misconception of the Islamic tradition.
The image that I kind of that came to mind as I was reading your book is it reminded me so much of C.S. Lewis's book, The Screwtape Diaries. And for those who are not familiar with it, it's basically written by the head demon to the apprentice demons, and it's giving them instructions about how to tempt people. Okay. Now, if you ignore the demonic element to it, just see it structurally, the Quran is essentially like that. It's like the head preacher to the apprentice preachers, and it's giving them a series of instructions. Okay, if this happens, say, and then it's quotation marks. And when it's referring to the sort of the head preachers, it uses the word we. And and when it's referring to you, it's referring to, actually, in most cases, the you is the preachers, the preachers that have been trained up. And so if you can imagine that these preachers would have had their notes, from the head preacher, and then they would have their, like a book, which would be the lectionary, and they were good to go. They had their arguments. And even today, it's interesting, and I found it a bit spooky that even today, if you go to a place like Hyde Park, and if you engage with Muslims, you find that they have a script that they have learned off with ready-made arguments. And this is exactly what that group did in the 7th century. They gave them a script and said, right, go out and preach, convert people to the cause, and here's what you say in this context. Here's what you say in that context.
You still find it in the Quranic manuscript, in the Sana, the famous Sana Palimpsest. At the beginning of Surah 9, there is an indication: you do not say the Basmala. This is an instruction from the teacher to the preacher student: do not say the Basmala.
Wow, why not? Is there an indication why?
I don't know, but it is an instruction. I think pertains to what I've told you. It is not, this text has not the same background. The beginning of Surah 9, it has not the same background as many of the other surahs.
Yeah.
But still, what you told there is one of Edouard Marie Gallet's main hypothesis, is that the Quranic text at the beginning was a collection of instruction and drafts and preaching drafts for preaching.
Yeah.
And we can base this hypothesis on the very nature of those texts. They are not written in fully fledged Arabic language, in good Arabic language with all the dots and so on. It could have been, the dots existed, not all of them, but at the time in the 7th century, we have some Arabic texts that have the dots, and so here we have a proof that those were notes, drafts, instructions. And another thing.
So it's kind of like quick hand, or if you're writing quick notes, you're not bothered with getting everything exactly right.
You don't care about orthograph, spelling. You go very quick. And another thing is what Luxemburg pointed out. It is written in some kind of Garshuni. You know Garshuni? Garshuni, it's a language. It's a mixed language that Aramaic Christian used under Islamic rule. They wrote in Arabic, but the meaning was in Aramaic. Here, that's it. They wrote in Arabic from an Aramaic mind.
Yeah.
But the sense was meant to be in Arabic.
Yeah.
And so this is why we find so many Aramaic words in the Quran, in the text. This is what Luxemburg started to unravel, and what Robert Kerr, especially him, pointed out in a very important article, Aramaism in the Quran, which you can find on his academia page. It was published with the Inara group, and he explained that all the religious vocabulary of the Quran, all of it is Aramaic.
That's a huge find, isn't it?
A huge finding, and it's not it has not been translated into Arabic, but it has been directly written into Arabic.
Yeah.
And we can prove it. We can see the proof of it with the fact that the tradition has given new meanings to some words. For example, Messiah, Mashiach in Aramaic has been written as Al-Masih, in Arabic. And the tradition, the Islamic tradition, has given the word another meaning, because it tried to explain it with the Arabic language, in which it is a bit the same like in Aramaic. It means the one who has been oiled, and in the literal sense of it, it's
chosen one.
When you do this, you
heat, rub hands.
That's the one that has been rubbed.
Okay.
The one that has been rubbed.
Yeah.
This is the meaning of the Hebrew Mashiach, Aramaic Mashiach, and also the Christian Arabic Masih. He is the one that has been rubbed with oil.
Oh yes, because it's anointed one.
He's been christened. He becomes the Messiah.
That makes sense.
In Arabic, there is the same root, which means rub, but the tradition is they don't understand the word Masih as being the one that has been rubbed, but the one that rubs.
Right.
And so they have invented stories about Jesus rubbing some cows, something like this.
Yeah.
So he rubbed something. So he is the rubber. So he is Al-Masih.
Yeah, and that's a big diversion from its original meaning.
Many of those Aramaic words in the Quran, they invented new meanings.
Yeah.
And another very compelling evidence is the mention to the wine, the interdiction, the forbidding of wine, and a mysterious thing called MSR. MSR.
Is this
It
at the
is,
beginning of some surahs, is it? Is that, are you referring to that?
there are two verses in which the wine and amaser, maïsir in Arabic, are forbidden. And with the same expression, wine and maïsir are forbidden. The Arabic tradition has developed many stories about maïsir being some chance game. I don't know, like poker or something.
Oh, yes, like a game of chance. Yeah.
The game of chance, exactly.
Yeah.
But when you look in the Bible, in the Numbers book, you see that the Nazarites, the one who became Nazir, who consecrate themselves to God, they have to abide by this rule where the wine and the misera, MSR, misera is forbidden. Wine and misera is the fruit of the fruit of the vine, which mean raisins and grapes and so on.
Okay, so it means wine and the grapes essentially.
Wine and grapes are forbidden in the Bible for the one who consecrates themselves to God. And we find exactly the same thing in the Quran, but the meaning has been distorted because the one who gave an Islamic explanation to the Quran, either they didn't know about the biblical meaning, or, and it might be the best option there, they wanted to hide the biblical meaning and to give it another meaning. And they gave it this meaning of the game of chance, and then they invented many stories about pagan Arabic people playing game of chance like this and so on. Thousands of stories, maybe, I don't know, hundreds of them for sure. And this is how Islam was created. They took a text, the Islamic text, that was not an Islamic text at the beginning. At the beginning, it was a pre-Islamic, proto-Islamic text, and they forced it into an Islamic meaning by changing the sense of the words. For example, people of the book, the meaning has been changed from people of the Torah into Jews or Christian or Muslim. Date has been changed from Jerusalem temple into Kaaba. Hajj has been changed to Jerusalem pilgrimage into Mecca pilgrimage, and so on. And they gave like this a new meaning to the text, and it became the Islamic Quran. But the text is there to be read, and the evidence is here in plain sight for everyone to read it.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment, well, actually, some time ago, but I didn't want to interrupt you, that Jesus refers to that he would not drink of the fruit of the vine until he drinks it again in the kingdom of God. So presumably he is referring back to that reference in, I think it was the Numbers, was it, in the Torah?
Yes.
The Nazari group.
This claim is very, very important for those Messianist group. There are some sources that tells us that in the antiquity, some Jewish groups, Christian Jewish group, they made Eucharisties with water instead of wine.
Yeah.
Because wine was to be used only when Jesus returned. And this is one of the reasons of the forbidding the interdiction of the wine in the Quran. But wine is not really forbidden because there is a promise of wine in the hereafter.
No, that makes sense. Yes, the rivers of wine.
The hereafter in Islam, it's very strange. It's a mix of what happens after death and what happens when Jesus returns. You see the paradise, the gardens.
Yeah,
they are described exactly in the same way in the hereafter, in the heavens, and when God's reigns, God's rule is established.
And it harks back after Ephraim the Syrian as well, his hymnology in relation to his concept of heaven is lots of references to grapes and wine and so on. So it borrows heavily from there, I would say, as well.
Yes, this is also what, in a sense, what Christoph Luxenberg established. He proposed that the Houris, you know, the Houris, the virgins that are waiting for the believers in heaven, they are not really virgins,
Yeah.
women or maidens.
Yeah.
They are in fact grapes.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
wait for the good believer in heaven. And we can see in some old Coptic churches in Egypt, churches from the 4th or 5th century, some frescoes with which depicts Abraham giving grapes to believers, Christian believers coming in paradise.
Depicted as little babies, essentially, or miniature humans in his arms.
This thing with the wine and the coming of the Messiah, you don't have to take the wine and the grapes until the Messiah has come. It is a topoi, like the scholar says, a strong topic in this messianic context.
Yeah. So I think that's probably a good place to conclude. In our next sit down together, we should look at some example passages from the Quran and maybe the interpretations of them.
I'm working on this.
Yeah.
I'm working on this, and I'm also working on the English translation of my book, which will be, I hope, available with this new presentation. We will have to.
Yeah.
So look for it on the website, my website, thegreatsecretofislam.com, and it will be available as a free PDF file.
Wow, that'd be great. Yeah.
This is what I have done with the French edition, and for some of them who want it, I will make an Amazon edition also.
Yeah. So that should be ready in maybe in the next week or two. Do you think?
Yes. Within a week or two.
Yeah.
In a week or two.
Not putting you under any pressure. Yeah. Yeah, fantastic.
Lots of people are waiting for it.
Yeah, so maybe we could do like an overall summary just so everyone kind of gets the big picture. So maybe, do you want to kind of give us like the global view again, maybe just to summarize the main points in case anyone has lost.
We get from all of those evidence and new material is that at the beginning of the 7th century, there was a very strange Jewish Christian Judeo-Nazarene group that started propaganda to spread some propaganda, to spread some preaching to Arabs. They taught some Arabs to be preachers themselves and to rally their faith, rally their creed. And the creed was that Jesus would come back if the temple would be rebuilt and the true Mosaic religion, the true Moses religion, was to be restarted with sacrifices and so on in Jerusalem.
Not the rabbinical Judaism,
the
real one.
Not the rabbinical one.
Yeah.
And so they thought they preached some Arabs. Maybe Muhammad, the real historical Muhammad, was one of those preachers. But even in the Islamic tradition, we find mentions of other preachers, such as Waraka ibn Nawfal, or maybe the false prophets, maybe some people like them. And so there was this strange coalition, this strange alliance of Arabs and Jews that took Jerusalem in 638 and rebuilt the temple and tried to have Jesus come back. Jesus did not come back. So the Arabs separated from the Jewish Nazarenes and they fought among themselves.
So hence the Ridda Wars, the laws of apostasy.
And the main reason of those wars was who was to establish the reign of God, who had messianic powers to establish the reign of God. Jesus did not came, but the Arabs are in place. They had the power, but did they have divine power? And so they fought among themselves, not against the other, but among themselves, up until a very strong candidate appeared, Abdul Malik, who claimed to establish God's reign, who established the caliphate. The caliphate is etymologically God's reign.
Yeah.
The caliph is the vicar of God on earth, which means the caliphate is God's kingdom, kind of. Yeah. And Abdul Malik changed the game because he put away the Christian hopes, the Christian waiting for the coming of the Messiah. He built the Dome of the Rock in the place of the Jerusalem temple where Jesus was supposed to come back. And the Dome of the Rock does not tell anything about Jesus coming back. This is something else. This is a new religion which starts there, which is not Islam yet. Yeah. It is the religion of the supersedence of Arabs, of true believer, over Christians and Jews.
Yeah.
And it states their claim to rule over the world and to establish God's reign over the world. And from this, a new process starts, which will lead to Islam, mainly with the Abbasid inventing Muhammad as a prophet, inventing the Quran as a revelation, in order to legitimate their own claim to being sort kind of divine being who establish the reign of God. So this is a very, very short resume of my book, of my work, which is due mainly to Edouard Maurice Gallet thesis, and also to the huge movement of new discoveries, new studies, of all the scholars working together now and uncovering the real origins of Islam.
Odin, that was a tour de force. that was amazing. You've definitely opened up my eyes with both with your book and also with your presentation today. And I'm sure there will be many people who would be incredibly grateful to all that hard work that you put in over the past 15 years and the fact that you've delivered to us an amazing discovery, really, and it will change our whole outlook in terms of the origins of Islam. And it's a great foundation. You know, we spoke about the rock foundation, not the quicksand. And I think you've really pushed us towards that rock foundation. And I think there's going to be exciting days ahead as we build on that foundation. So Odin, thank you so much. And I look forward to bringing you back when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I would be thankful enough. And I would also like to thank you on behalf of all the viewers. We owe you a lot.
Oh, de rien. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Odin, and talk to you very soon.